Good afternoon. I'm Mary Dixon with the League of Women Voters, Glendale Burbank chapter, and I would like to welcome you to this candidate forum for the 28th Congressional District. The League of Women Voters was started in 1920 after women won the right to vote after ratification of the 19th Amendment. For the last 45 years or so, membership in the League has also been open to men. We join the cities of Burbank and Glendale in encouraging voters to not only vote for themselves, but to reach out to family members and friends and encourage them to vote as well. Be an ambassador to voting by helping others exercise their right to vote in these unusual times. The questions you will be hearing today are questions that we have received from League members and from the public. We hope that the candidates will find these questions to be challenging, enabling you, the voters, to make an informed decision. Today's candidate forum's rules call for adherence to the terms of civil discourse by both candidates. The hallmark of democracy is the willingness of all members of our community to treat each other with courtesy and respect, not just the people we agree with. It is in that spirit that we are here this afternoon to engage in a vital part of our democratic process, a civilized discussion of the important issues that confront our communities. So I want to thank the candidates for their participation. We also thank the City of Burbank for providing the facilities for these forums. We are particularly grateful for the assistance of Simone McFarland, the Public Information Office, and her staff. And now I would like to introduce our moderator for this forum, Rita Zwern. Rita is a longtime League member with much experience in moderating forums. We are grateful to Rita for the many hours that she dedicates to the League. Rita?
Good afternoon and welcome to the candidate forum for the 28th Congressional District. This forum is being broadcast live today on Spectrum Cable Channel 6 and AT&T Channel 99 and will be replayed at various times until the election date on the Burbank channel, as well as being available for viewing on demand on Burbank's YouTube channel and the City of Burbank's website. Let me begin by saying that attacks of a personal nature, including private matters having no bearing on a candidate's public persona or ability to perform the duties of the office in a competent, ethical manner, will not be tolerated. If a candidate makes a personal attack during his remarks, the time required for me to interrupt the candidate and remind him of the rule will be taken from his own speaking time. The two candidates for the 28th Congressional District are Eric Early and Adam Schiff. Each candidate will be allowed 1 minute for an opening statement, after which there will be a series of 12 questions during the forum. The first question will be addressed to candidate number 1, who will have 2 minutes to respond. Candidate number 2 will then have 1 minute to respond to the same question. The second question will be addressed first to candidate number 2, who will have 2 minutes to respond, followed by a 1-minute response by candidate 1, and so on. Following the question period, the candidates will be given 2 minutes each for a closing statement. During these responses, our timekeepers will alert the candidates to the time remaining with signs of 1 minute, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and a stop sign when they are out of time. An electronic timer will also be visible to them on the screen. In order to complete the forum in the allotted time and to ensure fairness, candidates exceeding their speaking time may be put on mute. We'll now begin with opening statements. Mr. Early, your opening statement, please. Mr. Early, you're still on mute.
How's that? Better?
That's much better.
All right, thank you. I thank the League of Women Voters for having me today and for setting this up. Greatly appreciated. Emerald and my thoughts and prayers go to President Donald Trump and to his wife Melania and to their family for a quick, speedy, and full recovery. My name's Eric Early. I'm not a politician. I've got a great family. Emerald and I, between us, have 4 grown kids. We got 3 dogs and a cat. And I run a great law firm of 25 lawyers, nationally recognized law firm. I do not need politics, but I live in the district. I watched Mr. Schiff for 3 years, frankly, lying to all Americans, and I couldn't take it anymore. So I spoke to the people I know, I stepped up, and I also believe firmly that we're in a battle of good versus evil in America, and it's time for good people to step up and fight to protect this country, the greatest country on the face of the earth. I'm looking forward to
Thank
today's
you.
debate.
Mr. Schiff, your 1 minute opening statement, please.
Rita, thank you, and thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this debate. You do a tremendous job every cycle in bringing issues to the American people. I'm honored to represent the people of the 28th District. These are my two top priorities in the coming session. First, we need to defeat this virus. We need to end the pandemic, which means we need to surge testing. We need to have tracing. We need to listen to the science. We need to wear masks and observe social distancing, and we can get through this. But until we have beaten the virus, I want to make sure that we have all the help to the American family that they need, which is why I'm fighting so hard for unemployment compensation, why I'm fighting for help for small businesses through the PPP program, why I'm fighting for renters for rental assistance and homeowners and help to the homeless, why I'm fighting for aid for schools and cities and states. And when we do beat this virus and when our economy comes back, we need to build the country back better with an economy that works for everyone. Those are my priorities, and I'd be honored to have your support.
Thank you. We'll now begin the question period, and the first question will go first to Mr. Early. From the beginning of the current pandemic, there's been confusion and disagreement over which level of government, federal, state, or local, should be responsible for the various elements of preparation and response. What steps should be taken to ensure that these responsibilities are clearly delineated going forward for future pandemic and other disaster mobilization efforts? Mr. Early, your 2 minute response, please.
That's a great question, and I wish, frankly, in this day and age, the federal government had more control over the response to COVID, but pursuant to the U.S. Constitution and the matter of federalism, as many folks have heard out there, this matter for control of the states get turned over to the governor of the state, the government of the state. And in our state of California, I have had major issues with the way we've been locked down around this state now. We're still largely in lockdown in Los Angeles. Our constitutional rights have been trampled on in this state by really a far left ruling class in this state. In fact, I call Sacramento the Politburo because it's wall-to-wall Democrats, whatever they want goes. We should have opened up with social distancing, safety measures in place. We all know the safety measures in place. Beginning of May, we could have done it. People should be allowed to worship in their churches and their synagogues. Jobs should be able to be open again. You know how many thousands and thousands of businesses have been destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of jobs have been destroyed because it has been the state government controlling this. Other states have opened up. We should have and absolutely could have here. In Los Angeles County, we're being led around on a leash by a doctor who's not even a medical doctor, who is leading around the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors and this mayor of ours. It's a terrible thing. In the name of saving us, they're killing us. Schools should be open. Depression's on the rise, severe mental illness is on the rise, spousal abuse is on the rise, child abuse is on the rise. You don't hear about any of these things. We should have been open ages ago. So getting back basically to the question you asked, I wish in this situation right now, the federal government was controlling our state's response. So many jobs would have been saved, so many businesses would have been saved, and so many personal lives would have been saved. But we're under this control, as I told you.
Mr. Schiff, your 1 minute response, please.
Thank you for the question. People need to realize it didn't have to be this way. We came into this pandemic better prepared than any other nation on earth, with a stronger health infrastructure, with some of the preeminent scientists in the world. But the incompetent response of Donald Trump has resulted in catastrophe, economic collapse, and the deaths of over 200,000 Americans. It didn't have to be this way. I've introduced legislation that would take effect next year if it is passed, that would establish a nonpartisan commission like the 9/11 Commission to analyze what went wrong, why we didn't have sufficient protective gear, why even now 6 months after the fact, we don't have adequate tests throughout the country. It has been a monumental failure of the leadership of the President of the United States and his enablers in Congress. And we do need an objective reckoning, and we'll get one, just like after 9/11. And that, I think, will help us better prepare for pandemics in the future.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. The Congressional Budget Office projected in April 2020 that the deficit for fiscal year 2020 would be at least $3.7 trillion, or 17.9% of projected GDP, and could be even larger if Congress approves more spending increases or tax cuts in light of the pandemic. However, many economists argue that with ultra-low interest rates on U.S. government debt and no inflation as yet, despite the aggressive spending on the pandemic response, federal debt levels are of less concern for the moment. Do you agree or disagree, and why? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
Concern over the deficit was one of the reasons why I opposed the $2.2 trillion tax cut of President Trump, Mitch McConnell, and Kevin McCarthy. That was $2.2 trillion that went to very wealthy families and large corporations that we didn't have. That was supposed to trickle down to most Americans, but didn't. It was used for stock buybacks and other purposes of executive compensation. The result is our deficit and our debt grew even worse. I agree the deficit and debt are a very big problem, but I also think that as we emerge from this pandemic, there'll be those that push for austerity. Even now, Mitch McConnell, who pushed through that $2.2 trillion tax cut, says he can't support a $2.2 trillion HEROES Act that would help the unemployed and help small businesses. There were plenty of resources apparently for large corporations, plenty of resources for very wealthy families, but now that working families need help, Mitch McConnell says and Donald Trump says we can't afford to help them. Well, I think we have to help them. I think we have to provide unemployment compensation, help for small businesses. Many people have put their whole life into building wonderful businesses only to see them close their doors. So even as we come through this, there are going to be people pushing for an austerity budget that will suddenly discover deficit and debt when they were supporting tax cuts that made that much worse. But I do think that we're going to have a midterm and long-term plan to get back to fiscal responsibility, but we can't go straight to an austerity budget coming out of this crisis. So I think that's the prescription that we need. We need to stimulate the economy coming out of the pandemic and out of this Trump-caused recession. But once we do restore prosperity, then I think we have to make sure that we have a plan to reduce the deficit, reduce the debt, and pay down all the debts that have been incurred, so we're on sound fiscal footing again.
Thank you. Mr. Early, your 1-minute response, please.
Federal deficit is one of the largest problems we face as a country. Mr. Schiff should know that. He's been in office for 20 straight years. He's approved every budget increase known to man. Why he's sitting here blaming it on president who's been in office 3.5 years is beyond me. Listen, briefly getting back to the COVID response, Mr. Schiff knows what he was doing when this threat was growing and gathering. He sits on the House Intelligence Committee. He knew from day one that this threat was coming to America. That was in December. In December, January, February, and the beginning of March, when the president was thankfully and predictably acquitted by the Senate, Mr. Schiff took this entire country, along with his enablers and the mainstream media, through this impeachment sham. And that was the focus of everything for that entire time when this threat was growing and gathering. And when that sham was finally over, COVID was upon us. So, it's easy for him to blame everything on the president, but he fails to forget that he's the one Mr. Schiff, is the one that's been in office for 2 decades. For that reason alone, by the way, he should be voted out of office.
Thank you. The next question will go first to Mr. Early. There has been great disagreement in Congress over how much economic assistance should be given by the federal government to states and local governments in light of the steep shortfalls they are experiencing as a result of the pandemic. The Senate Majority Leader has even suggested that the states should consider bankruptcy, if necessary, as an alternative to receiving additional federal aid. Do you agree or disagree, and why? Mr. Early, your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you for your question again. Listen, our state of California was financially bankrupt for years and years, way before COVID ever hit us. because of policies by the Politburo up there of taxing us into oblivion, forcing small businesses out of state because of ridiculous regulations, taxes, and everything else. And so, I agree with those, frankly. I want to do what I can to help District 28. I'll do whatever I can from the federal government to help District 28. But the notion that the federal government and taxpayers all around America should bail out the state of California for these outrageous financial policies we've been living through for all these years, you can't put that on the backs of every American. We're going to have to get smart. We're going to have to get creative here in the state. We're going to have to take the regulations off of our businesses. We're going to have to lower taxes. We're going to have to turn this into a state again where businesses, job creators want to do business again, where people don't want to leave anymore. The taxes are out of control. There are ways to do it, but we have to bring sound, conservative fiscal policies again. Right now, the state of California, it's not just right now, it's been going on for years. They treat job creators, I run a business. They treat job creators like we're the enemies. It's totally backwards and upside down. So we got to get our hands on this. We've got to get our hands on the pensions, which are out of control. I support fire and safety. I don't want to touch their pensions, but for everybody else's pensions, we have to be serious about this. We have to be real about this in the state of California. And we have to do what is right for all of the people of California and really rebuild California's economy from the ground up. And taxing everybody into oblivion, which is what the Politburo does, is not the answer.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
I do support help for the states. I don't believe, as Mitch McConnell apparently does, that we should let states go bankrupt. Look, when hurricanes hit Louisiana and Texas, I didn't ask, is that a red state? Are those red states or blue states? These were Americans that were hurting, and they needed help. This pandemic is hitting every state. It's not just hitting blue states. It's hitting every state in the union. They all need help. None of them have the capacity to deal with the devastation, the economic devastation of this pandemic. If we don't help them, it means the layoff of firefighters and teachers and first responders. It means adding to the unemployment rolls. None of that makes any sense. And of course, it's absurd to suggest, no, we're just going to provide help to one congressional district and ignore the state or the other cities. Congress doesn't work that way. We need to help the states and cities. We need to help the school districts. The school districts in LA, for example, are among the largest food banks in the country. They need our help. This is why McConnell needs to come to the table. We need to get this relief package done. Enough stalling.
The next question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. On September 1st, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announced a 4-month ban on evictions for most renters, allowing some people who are unable to pay rent to stay in their current housing through the end of the year. However, both housing advocates and landlords said that the CDC ban, without financial or rental assistance, doesn't go far enough to protect both renters and rental property owners. What can and should the federal government do, if anything, to address this critical issue? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
One of the opportunities I've had to meet with my constituents during the pandemic, which of course has been hard, has been delivering food to people in my district. And I had a revealing encounter when I delivered some food to one of my constituents in Hollywood. She showed me $500 worth of unpaid utility bills and told me she couldn't afford to pay her rent and her utilities, and she couldn't afford to lose her home, so she was choosing not to pay her utility bills. This is the predicament facing millions of Americans. It's why I'm fighting for $100 billion in rental assistance and $75 billion in assistance for property owners to make sure that people aren't evicted, they aren't foreclosed upon. The moratoriums on eviction and on foreclosure are important. They were a vital emergency step, but they're not enough on their own. They will need to be extended, but they're not enough on their own. And the reason they're not enough is because the rent is still going to come due in a big balloon payment when the pandemic is over. And many people aren't going to be able to afford that rent payment. And the result is going to be eviction and adding to the homeless crisis, which was already at epidemic proportions even before the pandemic. This is why helping renters pay their rent with $100 billion in the HEROES Act that I'm supporting is so important. It's why helping those small property owners pay their mortgages so that they're not foreclosed upon. Because otherwise you have a cascade of synergies that really destroy the economy even further, where renters are evicted, small landlords, they can't pay their mortgages, and it just adds to the economic suffering and it adds to the homeless population. So I think probably the most important thing we can do right now at the federal level is provide that support for renters to help them pay their rent. That also obviously benefits the mom and pop landlords who receive rent and can make their mortgage payments.
Thank you. Mr. Early, your 1-minute response, please.
Well, I speak to our constituents every single day of the week. I speak to business owners. I speak to people who can't afford their rent right now. I speak to landlords who can't afford paying their mortgage payments. We're in desperate straits. And, I'll say to my opponent, Gavin Newsom, tell him to open up this state. Tell him to get people back to work. Tell him to get jobs from teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. I know incredible job creators. I know some of the greatest restaurants around, for example, they work their blood, sweat, and tears for years and years. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. They could have opened years and years ago. We have to do whatever we can to help our renters, our landlords, our people, everybody. I've been an attorney for 27 years. I want to do whatever I can to help everybody dig out of the ashes of COVID. This is an unprecedented situation. I've worked with all the stakeholders for many years. I want to roll up my sleeves. I have the desire, the talent, and the will to do it. Work with every stakeholder here.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Early. The pandemic has only made the lack of childcare options in this country more apparent. What role do you feel the federal government should play, if any, in ensuring that good quality, affordable child care is made available to every American family? Mr. Early, your 2-minute response, please.
Obviously, the ideal response would be the federal government should just spend more money, give it to the states to pay for child care. Our federal government, you know what the deficit is. It's financially underwater after many, many years. First of all, we need to reopen our schools. We need to let kids go back to school. We've all seen the numbers. I think it's 99.99% or something of school-age kids actually, unfortunately, die from this COVID. It's time to send kids back. It's time to let parents go back to work. It's time to stop this lockup. But we need to do whatever we can to help parents pay for childcare. There's no doubt about it. And I would look into whatever I can to do it. But listen, at the end of the day, rebuilding from COVID is one of the things I absolutely want to do. Mr. Schiff abandoned this district 20 years ago. All right. We need somebody like me, a practicing attorney. I've worked with everybody from renters groups to workers groups to, realtors to contractors to insurance companies, the whole span of what we're dealing with. We're going to need somebody like me to get in there, work with everybody, roll up my sleeves, and do whatever I can from Washington to help deal with all of these major issues. We're going to be digging out of an unprecedented disaster. Our economy has been destroyed, and it's one of the reasons I'm so upset with this state government here, because they don't seem to have any care up there in Sacramento for the job creators, for the workers, for everybody that's living here. They are, for whatever their reason is, and at this point, I'm starting to wonder if they have ulterior motives, quite frankly, to keep us locked down. But I want to do whatever I can to help us dig out from COVID. And Mr. Schiff has been in Washington. He has no idea what's going on here.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you, Rita. I think we're making some progress here. Mr. Early has gone from opposing aid to the states in the last question to supporting aid to the states for child care in the current question. I agree. We need to help the states, and we need to help with child care. It's why there's $75 billion in the HEROES Act for child care. There are many parts of the country where it's not possible, it's not feasible, and it's not safe to reopen the schools. And that means that parents that do need to go to work need adequate child care. And that's why that help for child care is so important. And so the $75 billion that we're fighting for right now, that's being resisted by the White House and Mr. McConnell in the Senate, is absolutely essential. Every parent that is trying to be an educator, trying to do their jobs, trying to hold it together right now understands the vital necessity of childcare, because the states don't have the capacity right now. That's a role the federal government is going to have to play. And the HEROES Act is a very good place to start.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the pre-clearance coverage formula of the Voting Rights Act of 2013, removing a critical tool to combat racial discrimination in voting. Since that ruling, several states previously covered under pre-clearance have moved to restrict voter rights by implementing restrictive voting measures such as strict photo ID requirements, early voting cutbacks, and registration restrictions. Do you support or oppose the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act of 2019, which would help ensure racial barriers to voting are removed from elections across the country and restore key protections of the Voting Rights Act, and why or why not? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I strongly support the John Lewis legislation. John Lewis was a friend of mine. He was a champion of civil rights. And the way to pay tribute to him is not just with words, but with action. And this bill to restore voting rights protections is absolutely essential. But I want to broaden this question, because what we're seeing is now an effort to disenfranchise millions of people. This has taken place over decades, with states enacting deliberately burdensome voter ID laws to discourage voting, with states closing down polling places in urban centers to disenfranchise people of color, with purging of voter rolls. It's all part of a deliberate strategy to reduce the number of Americans who can vote. And why? Because those that support the president's divisive backward agenda are in a minority of Americans. And Mitch McConnell and others know that if Americans turn out and vote, they will reject that divisive and hateful and backward ideology. And so they're trying to restrict the franchise. And probably the greatest threat to the franchise right now is the president's efforts to discredit in advance the votes of millions of Americans who, of necessity during a pandemic, will be voting by absentee ballot. That the president of the United States would not agree in advance to the peaceful transition of power, becoming the first president in the history of this country not to do so, and would seek to discredit whether we can conduct a free and fair election is just appalling. It is a threat to all of our democratic freedoms, but happily we have a response. We can turn out, we can vote in such massive numbers that we can reject Trump and Trumpism and all the Trump enablers and those who are Trump wannabes, and we can turn this page in our history. It's never been more important to vote. This is the most important election, I think, of any of our lifetimes. And this effort to disenfranchise people, the foundation of our democracy, is one important reason why.
Thank you. Mr. Early, your 1-minute response, please.
I wish I had longer than a minute. That was a pathetic response. It shows that my opponent, I mean, this guy's got Trump derangement syndrome on steroids. Everything is Donald Trump's fault. My opponent has tried to disenfranchise 63 million voters in America from our votes. He spent 3 years doing that with a Russia hoax where he lied to all of America, enabled by these crazies in the mainstream media. It was totally outrageous. He wanted to steal 63 million votes. That is disenfranchising. And then when he failed at that, then came the impeachment sham. He wanted to make sure that the person we wanted to vote for couldn't run for election again and should be thrown out of office, all based on total BS. All right, that's what we're dealing with Mr. Schiff. He is a master at disenfranchisement, quite frankly. I firmly believe we should have ID before we can vote in the United States of America. All right? If somebody doesn't have ID in this day and age, everybody's got ID. It's not a black thing. It's not a white thing. It's not a brown thing. It's not an Asian thing. It's time to show ID.
Mr. Early, the next question is directed to you. As a result of the public uproar over the killings by police of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other Black Americans, several proposals for federal action have been suggested by the Congressional Research Service, including directing law enforcement agencies that receive federal funds to conduct racial bias training for employees, or adopting policies that prohibit racial profiling and designating the use of chokeholds as a civil rights violation. Would you be in favor or opposed to such proposals, and why or why not? Mr. Early, your 2-minute response, please.
First of all, I want to say that I am fighting for every law-abiding American citizen of every race, creed, color, and sexual orientation. Just want that known loud and clear. George Floyd was murdered, and that officer should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But I am a huge supporter of law enforcement, all right? 99% of our brave men and women of law enforcement do acts of thousands and thousands of acts of heroism, of kindness every single day of the week. We don't see those videos for some reason on TV, all right? And as any officer will tell you, the one thing they hate most is a bad cop. So we have to figure out ways to root out and fire the 1% or so of bad cops, all right? But what's been lost in the sauce here is the 98, 99% of great cops, and they're doing everything they can to make sure a George Floyd situation, a Breonna Taylor situation never happens again. And I support them in that. But you know, in this day and age, when our men and women of law enforcement are under attack, left, right, and center, we need leaders again. Thank God President Trump supports our law enforcement. We need leaders again to come up and support our men and women of law enforcement. We're living in this state of California right now. I call it a leaderless state. Newsom, Becerra, this spineless Eric Garcetti, our mayor, and Schiff, who's the worst of any of them, won't come out and unconditionally support our men and women of law enforcement, and it's making their lives even more difficult and putting them in even more danger. And it makes me sick, frankly, that we can't get that in this state. Mr. Schiff will now say he doesn't support defunding. He supports defunding. I support defending law enforcement. And we have to do whatever we can to protect everybody and make sure what happened to George Floyd and Breonna never happen again.
Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you. I spent almost 6 years as a federal prosecutor prosecuting violent crimes, carjacking, bank robbery. I prosecuted white-collar crime. I prosecuted dirty cops as well. So I know a little bit about law enforcement. I know how many good people there are in law enforcement, but I also know that there's systemic racism in the criminal justice system. And I do support that legislation, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. I do want to say also with respect to Mr. Early's frequent personal and ad hominem attacks, you know, we watched a spectacle of a presidential debate a week ago. That was a national embarrassment. And I think the country roundly rejected the kind of personal attacks of Mr. Trump. I don't know why you would want to emulate those here. I would think you would learn from that experience. But I do support strong police reform. I do think that we need to attack the terrible and tragic murder and loss of life, predominantly Black Americans at the hands of bad cops. That doesn't diminish from the good cops, but we need accountability, and the George Floyd Act will.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. Climate scientists concur that climate change has created warmer, drier conditions, thereby increased drought, increasing the risk of fire and extending the fire season. The Mendocino Complex fire is the largest in California's history. Climate scientists also say that in general, hurricanes will become more intense with higher wind speeds and greater levels of precipitation. This is a two-part question. First, do you believe in climate change? And second, if a new president who believes in climate change is elected, what would be your first steps in addressing climate change? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I do believe in climate change, and I think it was a disastrous mistake for the United States to pull out of the Paris Accord, something my opponent supported the president in doing. We effectively ceded leadership on climate change. We don't need to look around much farther than California to see the impacts of climate change. Our state is on fire. Other parts of the country are experiencing their own extreme weather, and of course, this is happening all over the world. We need a strong and determined attack on climate change. For years, I've supported an Apollo project-like approach that invests in renewable sources of energy, that tries to wean us off of fossil fuels, that invests in new technologies, help boost funding for ARPA-E, the innovative energy that invests in things like the next generation car batteries, the most efficient solar voltaic cells and wind generation of energy. We also need to invest more in conservation. We need to use, frankly, a whole of government, all of the above approach to attacking this. And we have to treat it like the existential crisis that it is. I support a Green New Deal. I support that ambitious vision to make sure that we deal with this in as aggressive as a fashion as possible. Because at the end of the day, we're seeing the enormous effects of climate change, and we don't know when the tipping point is coming. From a national security point of view, which is what I focus a lot of my time on, we see new sea routes in the Arctic for the Russians and the Chinese. We see our own naval bases in places like Virginia underwater. We see resource scarcity in places like Yemen providing more fertile ground for terrorism. And so the effects are catastrophic. The nation that leads this effort, that develops these new green technologies, will also get a tremendous economic boost out of it. So I favor a very aggressive attack on climate change.
Thank you. Mr. Early, your 1-minute response, please.
Wish I had more than a minute again. Listen, Mr. Schiff said earlier, he says there's systemic racism among law enforcement. I believe he said that. That's flat out wrong. Before I was talking about the number of kids who unfortunately die from COVID. It is 99.999% or something that live. The number that die, thank God, is tiny. We don't want any deaths, obviously. I don't rule out the existence of climate change. But Mr. Schiff and his party have gone completely off the deep end. You know, his buddy Newsom gets up there and lectures us on climate change about fires burning, forest fires burning. We got to do whatever we can to stop forest fires. And that starts with clearing out all the underbrush, the kindling, everything else that their radical environmental policy said leave in the forest. You don't have to be a genius to know that if you leave firewood in a forest, you're going to increase the chance of burning the forest. So I want to look at all the science, both pro and con, and then I'll tell you what I think on what they are saying.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Early. President Trump has been very supportive of Turkey's President Erdogan, despite a bipartisan effort in Congress to increase sanctions on Turkey. Many of these political pressures relate to arms sales to Turkey, which President Trump advocates because they increase U.S. exports. In light of the most recent attacks by Azerbaijan against Artsakh, would you vote to take action against Turkey, including canceling arms sales to Turkey, even if the president was opposed to it? Mr. Early, your 2-minute response, please.
I firmly stand with the people, the brave, proud, and strong Christian people of Armenia, and I support their effort to have control over their ancestral lands of Artsakh. And right now, what we're witnessing there, and I've done 2 radio shows on this, on KABC Radio, and by the way, thank you, KABC, for covering this debate, and One American News, by the way. We have to stop, we have to put every kind of pressure we can on Turkey. They're a NATO country. I know how they got into NATO. Frankly, I have serious questions about why they're still in NATO. They're clearly fueling the Azerbaijani attacks on the Armenians. We should be stopping military sales to Turkey. We should be stopping military sales to the Azeris. We should be cutting military aid, and we should be doing whatever we can to protect the Armenian people from the attacks they're going through right now. All you got to do is look at history. Go back to 1915, when 1.5 million souls were slaughtered by the Ottomans. It was the Armenian genocide. And this country must finally and forever, recognize the Armenian genocide. I want the president to sign that recognition. I know Mr. Schiff likes to take all the credit for the Congress and the Senate recently recognizing the genocide, and thankfully they did that. Every Republican in the Senate and the Congress really hates my opponent. Many of his Democrat colleagues do too. It was not Adam Schiff that got those recognitions approved in government. So I totally support our friends, the great democracy of Armenia, and we have to start putting whatever pressure we can on Erdogan. He's gone way too far.
Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you, Rita. I authored the resolution to recognize the Armenian genocide, so that's one of the easier things, false statements of Mr. Earlier to disprove. It had very strong bipartisan support. And of course, I didn't do that alone, even though it was my resolution. That's been the product of work for decades by the Armenian diaspora. I've also been the co-lead on legislation introduced by Jackie Spear recently to combat the Azerbaijan attacks on Armenia and Artsakh. And I authored a letter joined by more than 40 bipartisan colleagues in the House of Representatives condemning Turkey and condemning Azerbaijan for their aggression. Turkey ought to be sanctioned and Azerbaijan ought to be sanctioned. Turkey is recruiting foreign fighters from Syria to come and attack and kill people. Azerbaijan is bombarding innocent civilians in Armenia and Artsakh. And I'm doing everything I can in Congress to push back and fight back. I think that our relationship, our NATO relationship with Turkey has to be completely re-examined given its atrocious behavior. I've confronted Erdogan personally over the facts of the genocide, and I will continue fighting for my Armenian constituents and supporting human rights activists all over the world.
The next question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. What changes or improvements, if any, do you believe should be made to the Affordable Care Act? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, the number one change I would make to the Affordable Care Act, and this is something that I fought for at the time the legislation was first proposed, and that is originally the Affordable Care Act had a public option that people could opt into, and that would have done a couple things. It would have provided high quality and very affordable health care for millions of people that might not have been available otherwise. It would have also created downward pressure on the cost of health care by forcing private plans to compete with an efficient government model of government public option. Now, we had to compromise. We didn't get that public option, even though I strongly supported it. So probably the number one change I would make to the Affordable Care Act would be to reenact that public option. That's something that Joe Biden also supports. I view that, frankly, as the ability to test a public option and allow people, for example, to buy into Medicare. I think that over time, we want to make sure that we can get to universal health care, and I think that's more important than ever. Mr. Early supports repealing the Affordable Care Act, doing away repealing it, doing away with protections for millions of people with pre-existing conditions. Now, he would have us believe, I guess, as Donald Trump would have us believe, that, well, he has 4 years to come up with his own healthcare proposal and has come up with nothing. He wrote a piece of paper the other day saying, I promise to take care of people with pre-existing condition. Well, Mr. Trump has broken so many promises. He's trying to railroad through a Supreme Court confirmation that will help repeal the Affordable Care Act. To do so during a pandemic, when people are struggling to pay for their health care, is absolutely unconscionable. So at the moment, we are in a life or death struggle, literally life or death, to save the Affordable Care Act. But if we're successful next year, I hope we can expand it, beginning with a public option.
Thank you. Mr. Early, your 1-minute response, please.
Yeah, one quick thing on what Mr. Schiff said in response to his last answer. Those Syrian mercenaries that are now fighting against the Armenians were paid for by the Obama administration, and Mr. Schiff signed off on that bill. So you might want to find out why your buddies in the Syrian mercenaries are now fighting the great Armenians. With respect to Obamacare, Obamacare has been a huge, huge failure. We need to do this again the smart way. We absolutely have to cover pre-existing conditions. I believe in the free market. The premiums that people have been paying since Obamacare came into existence, the health insurance premiums have skyrocketed. Just look at the way the numbers went up and up and up since Obamacare came in. It has cost families, middle-class families, lower-class families, upper-class, all families around the nation a fortune to pay for that. So it absolutely has to be reworked. The president has lowered drug costs in so many instances. We have to lower drug costs, especially for our seniors.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Early. Since the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and in light of the number of Supreme Court cases that have lately been decided down party lines, the court's role as a nonpartisan final arbiter is increasingly being called into question. Among the proposals for addressing the partisan divide on the court are increasing the number of justices, instituting term limits, and/or restoring the filibuster in order to encourage more moderate, bipartisan nominees. Which, if any of these proposals or others, would you favor? Mr. Early, your 2-minute response, please.
What we need right now is for Amy Coney Barrett to be confirmed as soon as possible. The President of the United States, this is the Constitution that Mr. Schiff always claims that he wants to follow and that he claims he's always fighting for while he's trampling on it, says that the President of the United States gets to choose. The Republicans have a majority in the Senate. It is very unfortunate that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had passed away. She was a true American. She believed in this country. She fought for this country. She fought for the Constitution. Unfortunately, she passed away, and she passed away while President Trump is still president. So it is time to confirm Amy Coney Barrett as soon as possible. Packing the Supreme Court would be an outrage. It should never be done. It was threatened by Franklin Roosevelt in the 40s, I believe. Thank God he didn't do it. It would be a complete scam and a complete sham on the part of any Democrat administration. And I sure hope that the next administration is not going to be a Democrat administration. But that would be a total sham, all right? We know the amount of people on the Supreme Court. There have been times where there have been a majority of what would call Democrat justices. There have been times when one would call a majority of Republican or conservative justices. You don't get your way. If you don't get your way because of just the way life, nature, and the U.S. Constitution works, you don't fundamentally change our country. So, let's confirm Amy Coney Barrett. She's a constitutional conservative. Let's see the rulings she'll issue. We don't know what the rulings are going to be. And let's not destroy her life like Mr. Schiff's party destroyed Judge Kavanaugh and his family and everybody else. This is a problem. People think I'm tough. You know why I'm tough? Because the people on the other side, Mr. Schiff acts like he's a gentleman. He's not. These people are tough, and they want to kill every Republican figuratively out there. We're not going to let it happen.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
When President Obama nominated Merrick Garland, Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans said they couldn't possibly consider him because it was a year from the election. In shockingly hypocritical fashion, of course, they're now trying to jam through an ultra-conservative nominee while people are voting, while an election is going on. That nominee will strip health care away from millions of people. That nominee may do away with a woman's right to choose. That nominee may prevent us from regulating pollution in the air or in the water. But even more significantly, perhaps, that nominee, I think the stacking of the court will discredit the Supreme Court as yet another partisan institution. I do think, should they go forward with that, a new Senate majority will have to think about unstacking the court by expanding its size. But the better thing to do would be prevent that from being necessary by waiting until after the inauguration for any confirmation of a new justice.
Thank you. The final question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. According to various reports, the United States has the highest total of guns per capita in the world. Opponents of gun control say that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to own guns, that guns are needed for self-defense from threats ranging from local criminals to foreign invaders, and that gun ownership deters crime rather than causes more crime. Proponents of more gun control laws state that the Second Amendment was intended for militias, that gun violence would be reduced, that gun restrictions have always existed, and the majority of Americans, including gun owners, support new gun restrictions. What gun control measures, if any, would you favor? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I thought after the tragedy at Sandy Hook that we would finally have a majority in the House and Senate to get common sense gun safety legislation passed. Tragically, that wasn't so, and we have seen mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting. I support universal background checks. It makes no sense whatsoever to go into a store as a felon, do a background check and be turned down, and then be able to leave that store and buy that same weapon off the back of someone's truck or go online and buy that weapon. That makes no sense. Americans overwhelmingly support universal background checks, and so do I. I think we should reinstate the ban on assault weapons. As one of my colleagues, an Army Ranger, Jason Crow, likes to say, if you want an assault weapon, do what he did and join the military, where they're very good at killing people. But I don't want to see our cops outgunned by them, and I don't want to see our citizens outgunned by them, shot at rock concerts and in country western bars or anywhere else with these deadly weapons. I support bans on extended ammunition clips, a whole variety of common sense measures which are supported not just by a majority of Americans, but by the majority of members of the NRA. And we need to fight back against this stranglehold on the Congress that the NRA has had, that the gun lobby has had. I introduced legislation to repeal the immunity that the NRA enjoys, to repeal the immunity that gun sellers have if they're selling negligently to people who are going out buying Saturday night specials or buying guns when they're straw purchasers and buying them to procure them for felons. So these are some of the common sense measures that we need. But more than anything else, we need more people in the House and Senate with the backbone to stand up to the NRA and not cater to their every whim.
Thank you. Mr. Early, your 1-minute response, please.
I strongly support the Second Amendment. Nobody's taking our guns. Period. End of story. It's called the United States Constitution. Mr. Schiff, time for you to follow it. Listen, especially in this day and age, with the tyranny that we're seeing all around. We are literally living in a state where a governor has taken over our lives, all right? We need guns to protect us from tyrannical governments. We need guns for self-defense in a day and age where your party is supporting defunding law enforcement, supporting these communists, these anarchists, these Antifas coming out of the cracks, burning and looting and trying, and who hate our country. This is a time when people need to be able to defend themselves more than ever before that I can remember. And from what we've been seeing, and actually what so many people in your party are showing, because they're buying guns too now, we're protecting our Second Amendment. Good luck going and finding one right now. They're sold out.
Thank you. The candidates will now have 2 minutes each for their closing statements. Mr. Early, your 2-minute closing statement, please.
Well, again, I want to thank you for having me today. I really enjoyed this very much. I wish Mr. Schiff was standing right next to me, quite frankly, but somehow this ended up as a Zoom, so here we are. Listen, Mr. Schiff, my opponent, has been a failure. He talks like he's morally superior to all of us. Mr. Schiff has lied to us for 3 straight years. He tried to take all of our votes. I'm sorry, but my opponent is morally inferior, and I'm tired of being lectured to by people like my opponent, frankly. We need somebody, again, who cares about our district. And notwithstanding everything that comes out of my opponent's mouth, the Wall Street Journal editorial board on May 12th, 2020 said it best. Editorial board, Wall Street Journal, not some make-believe publication. This is a direct quote. As for Mr. Schiff, no one should ever believe another word he says. And guess what? I don't. All right? So whatever was said now by him, I don't. We need somebody, again, who cares about homelessness. We got 66,000 people living and dying on our streets. I have a plan to deal with it. Regardless of what my opponent says, he's never done a darn thing about it. We need somebody who cares and supports law enforcement again and defends law enforcement. My opponent doesn't. We need somebody who cares and has the skills and the talents to help all of us rebuild from the devastation of COVID. I have those talents, I have that ability, and I care. My opponent belongs in a locked room in the swamp dreaming up hoaxes. And another issue, a huge issue for me, is the ongoing indoctrination of our kids in their schools. This is one of the biggest threats facing our nation. I've got a lot of experience with it. We've got radicalized teachers unions here who are teaching kids terrible things. We need to deal with it. I'm going to do it when I get to Washington. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute closing statement, please.
Rita, thank you, and thank the League again for organizing this debate. Really appreciate all the tremendous civic education that you conduct year in and year out. Just a word about my opponent. We already have one Donald Trump. Most of the country wants to get rid of that president, vote him out of office. We wish him well health-wise. I hope he has a swift recovery. I hope Melania and even my Republican senators and administration officials. I hope everyone that has been sickened with this virus has a swift recovery. But there's no underestimating the damage he has done to our country. The damage he has done in his tragic mishandling of this pandemic that has claimed the lives of now 210,000 Americans. He has shattered an economy that he inherited from Barack Obama, forced it into one of the worst recessions we've had in memory. He has attacked our democratic institutions, undermined the independence of our Justice Department, attacked whistleblowers and inspector generals, done incalculable damage to our democracy. The last thing we want or need, the last thing my constituents want, is another Donald Trump in Congress like Mr. Early. So I reject that indeed, as my constituents do. But let me tell you again what I have in mind for the next term. First and foremost, again, is fighting this virus, which means following the silence, making sure that that science is encouraged. Mr. Early had a debate watching Party last week where he wasn't wearing a mask, his supporters weren't wearing a mask, they were indoors. That kind of irresponsible behavior is why we're in this mess. Simply wearing a mask saves lives. I'm going to fight to save lives. I'm going to fight to get our economy back on track by defeating this virus. And in the meantime, I'm going to fight to make sure my constituents get the help they need through unemployment compensation, through help for small businesses, help with for independent contractors and
Thank
gig
you.
workers. Yeah.
Thank you. That concludes our candidate forum. Our thanks to the candidates and volunteers for your participation in this evening's forum. We're also grateful to Simone McFarland, the Burbank Public Information Office, and the staff of the Burbank Channel for their valuable support in making this event possible. Please be sure to vote, whether in person or by mail, so that your ballot is received by November 3rd. And remember, it's the votes, not the polls, that count. Thank you.